My name is Lydia Greer, and I was never the daughter anyone in my family wanted to brag about. That truth hits a little harder as I stand just outside the ballroom, smoothing the sleeve of a white suit I wore more for armor than fashion. I can hear the laughter through the doors, warm, loud, full of voices that never learned to say my name without a sigh at the end. Tonight is my little sister's engagement party. I wasn't exactly invited. The email came late, sent by a distant cousin, with a polite hope you can make it. That's code in my family for, no one will notice if you stay home. I almost did. After all these years, I could have spared myself one more evening of forced smiles and questions that sound more like reminders. So, Lydia, what do you do again? They never ask because they care. They ask because the story of my life never fit the narrative my parents loved to tell. The one where their younger daughter shines, and the older one just exists. Quiet, out of place, failing, as they see it, to become anything worth mentioning. But I came anyway. I'm not sure if it's hope or pure stubbornness that got me dressed and through those doors tonight. Maybe I needed to see for myself if anything had changed, or if I'd finally outgrown the sting of being invisible in my own family. Maybe I just wanted to put an end to something that never really started. I wasn't looking for a fight, and I certainly wasn't expecting anyone to notice me. I'd learned how to blend in, how to let my silence do the talking. But the funny thing about silence? Sometimes it's the one thing nobody can ignore. It's strange how a single label can cling to you, outlasting birthdays, graduations, even those quiet victories you try to claim for yourself. In my family, I was always the odd one out, though nobody ever said it to my face. The words were softer, wrapped in polite concern. Lydia's just different. Or, when my father was in a more generous mood, she sees the world her own way. But difference in the Greer family was just a kinder word for disappointment. Growing up, I was the quiet shadow at every family gathering, the girl who preferred computer games and science kits to ballet shoes and soccer practice. While my little sister Rachel basked in the spotlight, her hair perfectly curled, her trophies polished, and lined up like soldiers on her dresser, I found comfort in the glow of a computer screen and the privacy of my bedroom. Rachel was everything my parents had hoped for: popular, charming, effortlessly bright. Her report cards were framed on the living room wall. My own, even when crowded with honors math and perfect attendance, ended up in a drawer, forgotten with the Christmas cards from old neighbors. Still, I tried to belong. I went to the parties, laughed at the right jokes, offered to help set the table. But it was never enough. My father once told a friend at a barbecue, loud enough for me to hear, that Rachel was destined for great things, and, Lydia, well, she'll figure it out, I'm sure. I pretended not to notice. After a while, you learn to turn your ears off, to armor your heart with silence. College was my first real escape, a scholarship to a tech program 3 states away. I left home with 2 suitcases, a box of secondhand programming books, and a quiet promise to myself that I would do something remarkable, even if nobody at home ever cared enough to notice. I never wanted to prove them wrong. I just wanted to prove to myself that my life could mean more than the one who never fit in. But the Greer family's reach was long, and their judgments traveled even farther. I remember one Thanksgiving, home from college, and hopeful for something like pride or connection. We sat around the table, turkey steaming, Rachel's boyfriend in tow, my mother beaming as she recited Rachel's latest triumphs. When it came time for my update, my father barely looked up from his plate. Lydia's doing some kind of computer thing, he muttered. Not sure what you call it. She spends a lot of time on that internet. Someone made a joke about me being a professional cat video watcher, and the laughter burned my ears for the rest of the night. I learned not to share much after that. Every achievement felt too small, too technical, too easy to dismiss. So, I built my own world in the quiet spaces between their noise, one where I could fail and try again without ridicule, where I could tinker and dream and fall short without anyone keeping score. The more they ignored me, the more I poured myself into my work. College became late nights and open tabs, competitions won under fake usernames, side projects coded until sunrise. It was a lonely freedom, but it was mine. The irony is that my family's indifference hurt worse than their criticism ever could. Sometimes I wondered if, in their eyes, I had already failed before I even began. The failure label wasn't about what I did. It was who I was. And maybe, for a long time, I believed them. But the thing about labels is, you can only wear them for so long before you start to chafe. So I wore mine quietly, a scar beneath my sleeve, waiting for the day I could peel it off, whether anyone was watching or not. Leaving home was less an act of rebellion and more an act of survival. My parents called every few weeks at first, but the calls became shorter, more strained, just enough to check a box, not enough to bridge the distance that had always stretched between us. At college, I was anonymous and free, a face in the crowd. It suited me. I spent my nights hunched over my laptop in the library, fueled by vending machine coffee and an ache to prove, to whom, I couldn't say anymore, that I mattered. Money was tight. I took every freelance job I could get, building websites for local businesses, debugging ancient code for professors, sometimes pulling all-nighters just to make rent. The work was lonely, but the solitude felt honest in a way my family never had. I learned the hard way that resilience isn't built on applause, but on grit, on getting up after every door closes, on persisting when no one is watching. There were setbacks, plenty of them. I applied to internships and was passed over for better fits, watched classmates get offers at shiny firms while I juggled 3 part-time gigs. But every failure taught me something my family never could. I didn't need their validation to keep moving. I started entering tech competitions online, often under usernames that hid my gender, and sometimes I won. Small cash prizes, a bit of recognition from strangers on message boards. It was enough to keep going. After graduation, I moved to a small, dim apartment in the city. My parents never saw it, never asked. Rachel was getting her master's and posting smiling photos with her fiance at wine tastings and charity galas. My mother sent those pictures to our family group chat, always with the caption, "So proud of our Rachel." For me, there were no updates to share. I knew by then that my victories weren't the kind my family celebrated. Still, I kept building. I took a risk and launched a tiny business. Just me, a cheap website, and a dream to make small business automation easier for people like me. The first year was brutal. I watched my savings drain to nothing. There were days I skipped meals, turned down outings, and convinced myself I could hold out for just 1 more month. But then, slowly, things began to change. A single contract with a mid-size firm led to referrals, then another client, then another. I brought on a partner, then a few remote contractors. I worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, rarely sleeping, always learning. I kept my name off the front page, let others take credit, quietly building the engine that drove it all. My family still had no idea. When we did speak, my mother asked, "Have you thought about coming back home? There's no shame in moving in with us if things aren't working out." I lied and said I was doing fine. I never mentioned the business, never tried to explain what I was building. Their version of my life was set in stone, and I didn't have the strength, or the need, to correct it. The truth is, my silence wasn't just a shield. It was the foundation of my new self. I stopped chasing their approval and started pursuing something better. Peace with my own choices. I built my company in the shadows, with no applause, no family dinners, no one calling to say they were proud. In that quiet, I became someone I actually recognized. Someone strong enough to stand alone, even if nobody saw the work it took to get there. The invitation came on a gray Tuesday afternoon, buried among spam and software invoices in my inbox. I almost deleted it without reading. The sender wasn't Rachel or my mother, but a second cousin who lived across the country, a name I barely recognized. The message was polite, formal. The Greer family cordially invites you to celebrate Rachel and Evan's engagement at the Fairmont Grand Ballroom. RSVP appreciated. There was no note, no signature, not even a question of how I was doing. Just a date, a time, and the suggestion that my presence was optional. For a moment, I hovered over the delete button. After years of silence and half-hearted holiday texts, it was almost laughable that they would reach out now. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to spend that Saturday in the quiet comfort of my apartment, a mug of tea in hand, coding away as usual. But another part, a smaller, quieter ache that never fully healed, wondered what it would feel like to be seen, even for a night. I said yes, not out of hope for reconciliation, but for something I couldn't name. Maybe I was ready to see for myself just how much, or how little, had changed. The day of the party, I chose a white suit. Simple, tailored, and strong. No sequins, no pastel florals, nothing that would beg for approval. As I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror, I barely recognized the calm in my own eyes. I wasn't here to perform or compete. I was here on my own terms. The ballroom was a flurry of gold and crystal, laughter bouncing off high ceilings. I stepped inside and felt the familiar chill settle around me. The subtle pauses in conversation, the quick once-overs, the way my arrival barely registered. My mother was busy greeting guests, her arms full of gifts and good wishes. Rachel was glowing in a seafoam dress, surrounded by friends and Evan's family, her smile perfect for every camera flash. I found a quiet corner, hoping to go unnoticed. It wasn't hard. A few relatives offered clipped hellos, their eyes already drifting past me. One aunt asked if I was still doing computer stuff, her tone somewhere between confusion and mild disappointment. "Still at that little apartment, right?" Another chimed in. I nodded, letting their ignorance wash over me. Dinner was served, and I ate in silence, watching the Greer family play out its well-rehearsed script. My father raised a toast to Rachel and Evan. May their future be as bright as their achievements. My name was never mentioned. I told myself I was used to it, but some small part of me still ached. I wondered what it would be like to belong, just for a moment. The longing was so old, I almost didn't recognize it. The speeches ended. Rachel's fiance, Evan, made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and thanking guests. When he reached my table, he introduced himself with an easy confidence. I offered my hand, expecting nothing more than the routine exchange. But as soon as he heard my full name, Lydia Greer, his expression shifted. There was a flicker of recognition, a pause that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected all night. He looked from me to my parents, then back again, something unspoken passing across his face. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Evan's handshake faltered. His eyes, friendly a moment ago, narrowed as if he were searching through memories, sorting puzzle pieces. "Wait, Lydia Greer?" he said, louder than I expected. "Are you, by any chance, the Lydia Greer who founded Greer Tech?" The room, so full of noise just a second ago, seemed to grow quieter around us, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. My mother's smile froze. My father, fork halfway to his mouth, stared at me as if seeing a stranger. For a long moment, I didn't answer. There was a satisfaction in that pause, a lifetime's worth of words unsaid. Then I nodded, as simply as I could. "Yes, that's me." Evan actually stepped back. I had no idea. I'm in the same space. Everyone's been talking about the Greer Tech platform since your latest release. My team's been trying to get a meeting with your business dev lead for months." He was almost breathless, not out of flattery, but genuine surprise. A ripple ran through the guests near us. Rachel, sensing the shift, hurried over, her smile faltering as she caught the end of Evan's words. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice just a bit too sharp. She looked from Evan to me, her eyes demanding an explanation she'd never cared for before. Evan turned to her, excitement spilling over. "Did you know your sister is the founder of Greer Tech? That Greer Tech?" He looked back at me. "You kept that quiet." Rachel's face drained of color. She stared at me as if seeing a ghost. "You're joking, right?" she whispered, but the answer was already written on my face. It was like dropping a stone into a pond. The ripples spread fast. A cousin nearby murmured, "The founder?" Then the words moved from table to table, picking up speed. Suddenly, people who had barely acknowledged me all night were turning in their chairs, craning their necks, whispering to one another. My aunt's wine glass paused mid-air. A family friend who hadn't spoken to me since I was a teenager leaned in. his voice hushed and reverent. You built that? I thought you were just, well, you know. I did know. I'd been just, well, my whole life. My father cleared his throat, his face struggling for composure. Lydia, he said, why didn't you ever tell us? The question felt heavy, years too late. My mother's fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth. She looked at me with something that might have been regret, or maybe just shock that her well-rehearsed family story had just been rewritten, right here, in front of 100 witnesses. For a heartbeat, I wanted to explain, to fill in all the blanks they'd never bothered to ask about, to recount the sleepless nights, the failures, the loneliness, the clawing climb towards something I could finally call my own. But that was the old Lydia, the girl always longing for approval, for recognition that would never come. So I just smiled, calm and small. No one ever asked, I said, letting the words sit, soft but final. Evan laughed, still a little stunned. Well, you just made this party a lot more interesting. He turned to the crowd, eager now, and said, You know the automation startup I've been raving about? That's Lydia's. She built it from scratch. It was surreal to watch the mood shift, how fast admiration replaced apathy, how curiosity wiped out years of indifference. Suddenly, I was at the center, not because I'd tried to be, but because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. People peppered me with questions. When did you start? How did you do it? What's next? The people who'd once looked past me were now hanging on every word. I answered politely, but never lost the edge of distance I'd learned to keep. Rachel was silent. Her fiance was nearly glowing with pride, and a bit of self-interest, I could tell. But Rachel looked at me as if her whole life had been reordered in an instant. I wondered what she saw now. The invisible sister, or the woman who'd done what no one expected. But the real victory was quieter than any applause. For once, I didn't feel the old ache to belong, to be loved, or even liked. There was peace in letting the truth stand on its own, in knowing I'd survived every dismissal and carved out a place that no one could take from me, not even the people who'd taught me how to disappear. After a while, the crowd's interest faded, shifting back to speeches and music and cake. My family kept glancing at me, uncertain, as if I might suddenly vanish again. But I stayed, comfortable in the silence I'd earned, certain now that I had nothing left to prove. I left the ballroom before dessert was served, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter growing distant behind me. I didn't need to stay for the speeches or the slow unraveling of family questions that would come in private, too late to matter. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, and I took a long breath, letting it settle in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened, finally, by the need to be seen. My phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at the words, felt the old ache flicker, then fade. There was nothing left to explain. I replied simply, You never asked. I walked back to my car alone, heels echoing on the marble, my own reflection crisp and certain in the lobby glass. There was no sense of triumph, no fantasy of revenge fulfilled, just a quiet satisfaction. The label of failure had never belonged to me. It was something my family had carried and tried to hand down. I had finally set it down for good. Maybe my family would rewrite their story, try to draw me back into a new narrative now that they knew who I was. Maybe they wouldn't, but it didn't matter. I had already built a life, whole, hard-won, and truly mine, outside their expectations. And that, I realized, was more than enough.